Welcome back, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling 20th century China through your research on Chiang Kai-shek.
Wow.
We've got your whole essay right here,
Yeah.
and it's all in Chinese.
Exactly, see that.
But lucky for us, we've got expert speaker name standing by to make sure we catch every little detail.
Happy to help unpack all this.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see a student's take on such a major figure. There's so much to dig into here, starting with how he rose to power and then, well, how he actually led.
Right, and the essay kind of jumps right into that classic history question. How did this guy end up in charge? Like, with Chiang Kai-shek, it's not like he was always destined for this. It says here you were all set to study in Europe back in 1919, so what changed?
Yeah, the essay makes a good point that his path to the top was not exactly a straight shot. He definitely considered his options. But that 1922 rebellion against Sun Yat-sen, that was a serious turning point. Can you imagine? 40 days stuck on a warship with Sun Yat-sen while a rebellion's going on?
Intense.
That definitely had to leave a mark, right?
Yeah.
Plus, his views on communism were shifting, especially after visiting Russia. That whole experience really put him on the map within the Nationalist Party.
So he kind of gets thrust onto the political scene in a big way.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, bam, instant takeover. The essay mentions he had some stumbles along the way. Like, even as they're setting up the Whampoa Military Academy, there's drama.
Totally. There's this part where it even says he tried to resign while they were building the academy.
Yeah.
Crazy, right? But it shows how much of a strategist he was. He knew that in a China that was basically falling apart at the seams, with all those internal power struggles and foreign powers lurking, that military strength was everything.
Makes sense.
And then you see it in action, like how he handled that Canton coup in 25. Just boom, took care of it. That's Guangzhou, by the way, in case anyone's keeping track at home.
Always helpful.
But the point is, he proved he could consolidate power without always resorting to, like, overwhelming force. It was a savvy move, politically speaking.
He was a smart operator from day one, but it sounds like, from what you're saying, it wasn't just ambition. Like, maybe being in the right place at the right time had something to do with it?
I think that's spot on. The essay really emphasizes that a lot of the time he was reacting to the situation at hand, seizing the opportunity, not always some big master plan. But he was incredibly good at navigating the chaos of it all, which, I mean, that was Chinese politics back then.
That takes us to, let's see, 1926, and what becomes this huge turning point, the Northern Expedition. The essay really goes into this one, and what's wild is how Chiang used it not only to gain ground, but also to manage all these internal party conflicts happening at the same time.
You see his pragmatism in full force here. There's a part that mentions how he got this financial backing from Shanghai's elite. He knew how to play the game, leveraging resources. That was his thing.
He won over some really powerful people, though. What was it about him that made them think, yeah, this is the guy we're betting on?
That's a good question. The essay kind of suggests that they saw someone who could finally bring some stability. And remember, China has this long history of strong central leadership, especially coming from the north.
Right.
The essay even makes a connection to those historical patterns, hinting that maybe Chiang intentionally tapped into that precedent, like he was consciously building his power on that foundation.
Whoa, he was playing the long game.
Oh, yeah.
Using history to bolster his own position.
Yeah.
That's next level.
For sure. The man understood how important powerful allies were, whether they were within China or on the international stage. But we both know that kind of balancing act can't last forever, especially with the communists rising in power. It was only a matter of time before things boiled over.
Which is a perfect place to leave things hanging. We're talking about the Shanghai Massacre. We're talking about a reunification that was anything but. Chiang's in for a wild ride.
Wild ride is right. And this next part of the essay really digs into that whole break with the communists in 1927. Talk about a turning point. I mean, the Shanghai Massacre, brutal.
Yeah.
So was this a pure power grab? Or was there something more going on with Chiang?
It's a big question, right? Like, to go that far, there had to be more to it than just wanting power for power's sake.
The essay wrestles with that, for sure. It acknowledges just how strategic this was for Chiang, but it doesn't downplay how awful it was. By breaking with the communists, he got rid of a major threat, consolidated his own power, and on top of that, got financial backing from folks who were terrified of communism. And that wasn't just within China, by the way. We're talking international players, too.
So it's like he was playing this global chess game, using the West's fear of communism to solidify his own position. And did it work?
Short term, totally. He comes out on top. But, and it's a big but, this is the beginning of that decades-long conflict between the nationalists and the communists. And that, well, it still shapes things today. But before we go down that road, let's jump to the period right before the war with Japan. The essay keeps coming back to this golden decade idea. Was it really all it was cracked up to be?
The student author, they sound a little skeptical, don't they? Like Golden Decade almost feels like propaganda when you're reading their take. So what did they find?
You're definitely picking up what they're putting down. The essay says, yeah, okay, there was some progress, but they question how widespread it really was. Remember how we talked about Chiang getting that financial support back during the Northern Expedition?
Mm.
We'll get this. A decade later, and the national budget was only 1.2 billion yuan, which if you're converting, that's about 400 million US dollars.
No way, that's it. After a whole golden decade.
Exactly. And it's not like things were cheap back then either. You'd think that number would be way higher.
Yeah, that's really makes you wonder, was it all going to the military?
The essay seemed to think so. They found that a huge chunk of resources went straight into beefing up the military, even though China wasn't actively at war with anyone at the time.
Interesting. So he's always preparing for the next fight.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And they make the point that this wasn't just Chiang being paranoid. They see it as a calculated move to keep control in a country that's, well, let's face it, pretty fractured. Internally, you've got divisions everywhere, and then externally, you've got all these other countries just waiting to take advantage.
A recipe for, well, for someone like Chiang Kai-shek to rise up. Someone who can project strength.
Exactly. And you got to remember, he always knew how to get the money to make it happen. Remember the Central Plains War?
Right, right.
The essay highlights how he basically bought alliances to crush his enemies. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is.
Wow. And then there's the Jiang Shek too, right?
Can't forget about them. That was a powerful group. Bankers, industrialists, mostly from Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces, if you're following along at home. And they threw their weight behind Chiang, giving him crucial financial support.
Those are the guys you want on your side, or at least not on the other side.
No kidding. These were serious power players, the kind of influence that can make or break you.
It's wild how those financial moves, they almost mirrored his military ones.
Totally. Like he was fighting on two fronts at the same time, one on the battlefield and the other, well, it sounds like he was basically in the bank.
And maybe that's what the student author is getting at, that to really understand Chiang Kai-shek, the military stuff is important, but you got to look at the money trail too.
Absolutely. The essay really seems to argue that Chiang, he got it.
Right.
He understood that money equals power. And he used it in every way you can imagine, to win over allies, to reward loyalty, or even just to outspend his opponents until they gave up.
It makes you think about how we define political power, doesn't it? It's not always about tanks and troops. Sometimes it's about who controls the purse strings.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Even the best strategist, the most well-connected leader, they can't predict everything. And that's where this essay takes this fascinating turn. It shifts gears and goes deep into Chiang's personality. And all this is happening as the war with Japan is looming.
That's interesting. It's like they needed to understand the man behind the uniform before diving into the war itself.
Right, like what made him tick? What were the emotions, the gut instincts that drove his decisions when it really mattered?
Like that old saying, uneasy is the head that wears the crown.
Yeah, something like that.
Sounds like Chiang Kai-shek wore that weight in a very specific way. What kind of picture is the essay painting? So we left off with this shift in the essay, like it was going deep, really trying to get inside Chiang Kai-shek's head. What kind of picture does the author paint?
It's fascinating. They pull from all these firsthand accounts, like little stories about the guy, and it adds up to this portrait that's complicated. He's shown as someone who could be incredibly restrained, but then, boom, prone to these outbursts too.
Intense.
Right, and really distrustful of any kind of formal system. Like he put way more stock in personal connections than he did in like bureaucracy and rules.
Which tracks with what we were talking about before. Those alliances, the financial ones especially, those were all about who he knew. The Shanghai elite, the Jiangxi clique. It wasn't just strategy, it was personal.
Exactly. And it wasn't always pretty either. There's this one part, that's an anecdote actually from the historian Huang Renyu. It says, Chiang once told these military cadets to hurry up and die for their country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, talk about hard.
No kidding. I mean, that's a different time, right? Different ideas about leadership. I can't imagine anyone getting away with that today, even in the middle of a war.
Right. And it's a good reminder of how brutal things were, what those wars really meant. And to the students' credit, they don't try to sugarcoat it. They're honest about the terrible stuff that happened under Chiang's watch, even as they try to understand why he made the choices he did.
Yeah, it's nuanced, right? They're not letting him off the hook, but they're also giving context. Like when they quote Hegel, That line about how whatever is real is rational. It's like they're saying in extreme times, maybe the lines get blurry, right and wrong.
It's a question historians are still debating, to be honest. How much can we judge people from the past by our standards today? It's tricky, but important to think about.
It really is. And this deep dive, it's done that for sure. We've covered so much ground, from military campaigns to like the psychology of leadership. What sticks with you most about how the essay tackled Chiang Kai-shek?
I think it's that the student didn't try to make things simple. Chen was this huge, complicated figure. And the essay, it presents a view that matches that. It's thought-provoking, makes you realize that history isn't just about knowing dates and names. It's about those messy questions, the ones that don't have easy answers, and those messy legacies. That's what shapes the world, even now.
I couldn't have said it better myself. This whole deep dive, it goes to show that sometimes even the most rational path, it's not so clear-cut, is it? It's about understanding the context, the pressure, and the weight of the decisions these leaders had to make. The impossible choices, when the stakes were that high. Something to think about long after this is over.